Hey, I don't know about you, but I can feel so scattered sometimes between the pinball machine of thoughts bouncing around my mind, not to mention all the notifications, my very loud children, and the ongoing demands coming at me all day, every day. The days can feel overwhelming. That's exactly why I created my brand new Start Your Day Planner. This planner helps you start each day clear, confident, and in control. This simple 5-minute morning routine gives you easy prompts that give context, clarity, and focus to your day so you know exactly what to focus on and you finally feel good about how you spend your time. And I'm so excited to let you know that the physical hard copy of the Start Your Day Planner is now available. You can head over to startyourdayplanner.com to get your copy. And if you want to check it out before you buy it, you can even download a free digital sample of the Start Your Day Planner. You can see the inside. Go ahead, get started on the system and try it out for yourself. Head over to startyourdayplanner.com and get ready to start your days in a whole new way. That's startyourdayplanner.com.
Looking for a fresh way to connect with God daily? Join me and hundreds of thousands of others who are spending time with the Lord each morning with the help of First 15. First 15 is a daily devotional created to equip believers of all backgrounds to connect with God in the first 15 minutes of their day. When you sign up, you'll receive a devotional in your inbox every morning that leads you through scripture, reflection, a time of guided prayer, and even worship. Signing up is always free and incredibly easy. Just go to first15.org/sign up to get your First 15 devotional and start connecting with God in a fresh way tomorrow morning. That's first15.org/sign up. We'll see you tomorrow.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Get Your Hopes Up. I'm Christy, Wright, and I'm so glad you're here. Romans 15:13 says, "May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by power of the Holy Spirit." Our God is the God of hope, and he wants you to overflow with hope. So let's start our week by getting our hopes up again. Now, I'm so excited about today because I'm sitting down with not only a best-selling author, podcast host, national speaker, but my good friend, Rebekah Lyons. Rebekah, thanks for hanging out with me.
Hey, friend, anytime.
And we are in your home studio here. So thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. I get to host you while you host me.
I know.
I love it.
I know. I love just friends in Nashville. It makes it so easy to collaborate and hang out. So you and I even had coffee before this recording, and I just love hanging out with you because I feel like there are so many things I learned from you, not just from your books, but just from your friendship and from your life. And one of the themes that you've talked about for a long time is resilience. You have a book on resilience, and this even comes into play in your podcast when you're talking about rhythms of renewal. But this is a topic that I think is nice to talk about, but hard to live out.
Right.
Like if you're like, do you want your kids to be resilient? And you're like, yes. Do you want your kids to go through really hard times? No.
Right. You're like, one of these things is not without the other.
Yeah. We were just talking about our mutual friend, Lisa Bevere, and I was hanging out with her last night, actually, and she said, she was talking about, her new book, Fight for Female, and she said, I think we all want to be heroes, like the heroes of the Bible, but we forget that comes with a battle.
Yeah.
And resilience is similar to that. And, I've just seen some patterns even in my own life, which, from the last couple of years of going through a wilderness season. There's been a lot of this, even in the body of Christ. I've seen thematically large groups of people going through a period of testing and wilderness and trials and battles. And sometimes you're like, is this the Lord? Is this the enemy? Is this just my life? And it could be hard to tease it out, but at the end of the day, it just makes you weary.
Yeah.
And so I'd love it if you would just open us up and talk a little bit about why is this a theme that you love to speak on and teach on and help people with resilience?
Well, the beauty of resilience, right, is that it's the adversity that awakens resilience, right? It awakens us to what we're made of, what's worth fighting for, what matters most in life. And usually hardship is the thing that exposes all those things. And guess what? We don't have to conjure it up. Jesus
is hard.
If you're like, is this the enemy? If this is God? Well, Jesus does tell us right in his word, in this world, you will have trouble. It's not you might, maybe if you're lucky, you'll avoid it. No, you will. You will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And so there's this tension that we're walking daily going, you can actually hold pain and joy, like grief and gratitude at the same time. You're going to have trial, and then you're going to have celebration. I mean, and we're women, so we can experience those two things within 30 seconds of each other. So just understand that it's the complexity and the layers of the fullness that actually forms us more into the image of Christ. And so I love how Jesus is in the garden praying, like, if it's possible, take this cup, but not my will, but yours. There's even our Lord himself is walking through the tension of like, I would rather avoid this adversity that's going to actually kill me, right? I'm going to have to be crucified so that those who come from me or after me will walk in freedom. So we know that this adversity is there for our good and for his glory. And so while we're like, who caused it? It's less about what the source was, but more about what is our response to those things. One of my favorite books is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and he's a Holocaust survivor. And this was written in like the late 1940s. And he said that our life is informed not by like Freud, who said we're made for pleasure, or Adler, who said we're made for power. Frankl says we're made for meaning. And he said meaning is defined by three things. And drawing from his Jewish faith, he says it's our bravery in suffering, our love unconditionally, and the kind of work where you leave a part of yourself in it. You know what I mean? Like even just hearing that, you're like, yes, that's what I want. I want to do the work that I leave myself. And the root word passion means to suffer. So if you're going to be passionate about anything, it means you had to walk a hard road in that area. And then all of a sudden you have a story you can't shut up about.
Right.
Like I didn't ask to be anxiety girl or special needs mama.
Right.
And yet God's going, hey, when I knit you in your mother's womb, all my works were wonderful. And so I knit you in such a way where I gave you these birthright gifts. And then I also, all your days were written and planned before one of them began. So there's a knitting, and then there's a destiny that's attached to the temperament and the knitting that is all going to work together for his good. And so that helps me when I think about this idea of hardship or struggle or trial. Those are always the things that mature. In James 1, makes you count it joy when you face trial, because it helps mature you, make you complete and lacking nothing, which of course we know we're not going to be that fully. But what we are doing is we are growing in our holiness. We're growing in our resilience. We're growing in our maturity. We are growing in strength and the ability to do hard things. And we don't run and cower and hide. We actually are growing in confidence because our faith is growing because of Christ.
Yeah. You used the example of, I didn't want to be anxiety girl or special needs mom or whatever. And I think about even my own journey, and I'm sure almost every single person listening, probably the road that they're walking is not the one they would have chosen. If they were going to script out their life and say, hey, this is the story of my life, this is what I want, it wouldn't be the one they would have chosen. Yet, on the other side of it, you're going, I'm so glad that I have this meaning, this purpose, this connection. So my son Conley was diagnosed with autism about 2 years ago, I guess it was. And I never would have chosen that. I was thrown into the special needs community kicking and screaming, Rebekah. Yeah. Like, honestly, if I'm really vulnerable, I was, I think, in denial for a couple years. And I prayed against that. I prayed against it so hard. I remember even meeting with you and be like, oh my gosh, we don't know what's going on. And now on the other side, through this experience, I said something to my counselor that I couldn't even believe the words I was saying as I said them out loud. As I was processing it, I said, I never want to leave this community. I never want to leave this community. I feel such a call, such a connection, I feel so honored to be in this community. And I wouldn't change a single thing about it. And to hear myself say those words when 2 years before was just anything but that. You do see the evolution of part maturity, part resilience, but also it's deep purpose. Yeah. I find deep purpose,
meaning
that God would choose me to walk this road. But let me ask you this, because you and I probably know
Can we just
people.
acknowledge your tears though for a second, right?
Thank you.
So those are sacred tears, because what that adversity did is it awakened something in you that was dormant. It was always there, but it was dormant. And the Lord showed you that, hey, this is actually all the goodness that I've had for you all along.
Yes.
And how kind of God to expose it, but how much does he delight in seeing you awakening to it?
Yes. And I even see we were talking even about the Enneagram when we were having coffee, but I'm an Enneagram 8. So there's this like deep desire for justice and fight for the underdog and whatever. And so to marry my personality and wiring and maybe my tendencies of how I'm wired to a community that is not seen or not accepted or not included and go, oh, I want to change the world. I want to, and just to feel God calling me into that space. So thank you for saying that. It's so true. It's, we become someone we almost don't recognize, but is so much better.
Right. And I'm going to tag on to that because now I'm feeling the tears. But I was telling Gabe the other day, I was like, I don't know why I keep crying, but like I feel such deep compassion. And the way I was giving it was like, I feel like a deep compassion for the lost or people who don't know Jesus. But I'm going, okay, well, where did that come from? Because it really, whatever the marginalized, the poor in spirit, right? Like when it's talked about in the Sermon on the Mount, like, Luke talks about it physically. The poor in spirit, like physically are struggling, right? So that could be any disability. That could be any form of like mental or physical disability or struggle. And then in John, he's talking about the poor in spirit is spiritually, right? And it's both. Like, I was like, I feel so much compassion for the lost, but then I also feel so much compassion for those who are on the outsides, the overlooked or the abandoned, whether that's special needs or somebody who's writhing with anxiety or somebody who doesn't know Jesus and their lives feel so despairing and hopeless. Like, how kind of God to allow us to be mama bears who live this up close in ways that now are spilling out into this greater good, this greater community, this greater advocacy and justice for all who are poor in spirit.
Right. And it's almost like, just staying on this path for a second, it's like he's opened my eyes to an entire community of people that I did not see like I see now. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. And so from the moment that we started down this road, even before we had his diagnosis, when we were at a more specialized school that was inclusive, I would walk through the parking, if I could make it through the sentence, I would walk through the parking lot, Rebekah, and I would just pray so specifically for every single parent of a special needs child that I didn't see them before.
Yeah.
I didn't see them like I see them now. And I didn't understand that journey like I understand it now. And I just think of the reverberation of those prayers in the spirit, but also in the earth that I will never see, that I still to this day, if I'm at the mall, if I'm at the grocery store, anywhere that I am, I can't not instantly pray for them as I walk by.
Wow.
And it doesn't matter the disability.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't matter if we're talking autism, anxiety, a wheelchair, Down syndrome, in anything that is outside the norm, that is outside just a normal, predictable life or normal learning development, normal schools, normal, typical, whatever. And I just think of, even if it was just the prayers alone, you find such purpose in that of God calling me into this space. And the, I don't know even how to say this, but for people that don't have that road, that haven't either had that lived experience, or even when they talk about it, they're not sure how to talk about it. I feel compassion for them in oh man, I wish they saw what I saw. Yeah. Not in how lucky to be them. Right. Life must be so easy to be in their home. Their family vacations must be so. I don't feel that. I there's moments of going, oh, well, they don't get it or whatever. But I also feel like, gosh, I'm so glad that I see what I see. Yeah. And I know what I know. And that compassion has been ignited in me that wouldn't be there otherwise.
Well, and there's a grace, I think, our kids, God allowed us to, I think, experience it in a very palpable, public, like obvious way. Right. I do think all souls apart from God have a quiet desperation that they like live with their whole lives and like they're longing and looking for the Imago Dei, but they can't recognize it. And I think we're seeing that on display in culture now. And I'm sure we'll talk about that more with resilience, but just this idea that everyone is walking through some form of a quiet desperation, whether it's anxiety, whether it's depression, right, whether it's abandonment, rejection, whatever it is. And sometimes those things become more acutely, more quickly. And for us, we had a very tangible expression for that. And for me, I was 26. So I was like, I'm a baby having a baby. And I said the same thing. I wrote the same exact sentence in You Are Free, where I said, all of a sudden, I noticed there was a sorority of mamas that I never knew existed, right, and a one to which now I belong. Right. And woo, that'll shift your perspective real quick.
Yes. I have a connection with the parents at Conley School that is unlike the connection I have at my other two kids' schools. Not better, just different.
Yeah,
it's
good.
different because if you're there, you know you're there because you had hard road to get there.
Yeah.
And so there is instant compassion and understanding. When we're having Conley's birthday party coming up, and when those kids come to that party, and it's all the kids from his grade, and all those parents are there needs to be no apologies for behavior. There's no, I'm so sorry. Oh, he didn't.
Yeah.
There's no explanation needed.
Yeah.
Because there's just instant understanding. There's instant empathy and compassion. And I think, that's one example of a trial you wouldn't have chosen, or a road you wouldn't have chosen, or a chapter you wouldn't have written in your own life story if you could map it out. But it does call up a resilience. And and there have been seasons where I feel like I'm having to will myself to have resilience and will myself to get through it. There are sometimes just days where I will be cleaning up pee in the bathroom because the boys can't hit the toilet or whatever, where you're just like, Lord, I know you see me, where it's just the day-to-day grind that can just wear on your soul.
Yeah.
And you're having to call up to say, like, I'm going to have a good attitude. I'm going to fight again. I'm going to, show up, even though what you really want to do is crawl in the fetal position and be like, this is too hard. I can't do another day of this. So I've got a question for you. When we talk about just what these trials, what these difficulties, whatever it looks like, it doesn't have to be what the examples we're sharing, but any type of difficulty, whether it's trauma or a tough season or just a job loss or something that's really, really hard, it seems like these seasons, for some people, do call them to a higher standard. And it draws out a courage and conviction and maturity and a deeper level of faith, a tested faith, something that the fire really does forge something more beautiful. But some people, it feels like it breaks them. It feels like everybody doesn't. Everybody doesn't stand up. Everybody doesn't say, yes, this has made me stronger. Yes, I will fight again. I will show up again. Some people harbor resentment or bitterness. They get angry at God. They do want to give up and kind of stop trying. In your work and in your experience, you have so much experience counseling and working with different types of people. Is there anything that really is determining factor of, like, if this calls them forward or if it just kind of gets them stuck there, kind of gets them stuck in that wilderness? Have you seen anything that are trends?
Well, the heart isn't going to stay static, right? It's going to go one direction or the other. It'll grow tender or it'll grow hard. And again, it's not at all about the circumstance. It's all about how we see the circumstance. And so this is in alignment with your Hope podcast, as I've always started to say this, is that the measure of trial you've endured directly relates to the measure of hope you offer the world. So that's one response. But another response could very much be, this, I didn't deserve this. This isn't, I've heard this so many times. I didn't ask for this. This isn't the story that I want.
This isn't fair.
This isn't fair. And we live in a victimhood.
Yep.
And whereas if we always have that posture of defense, then we actually can't grow tender. We will grow hard. We will be bitter. We will be resentful. And unfortunately, our lives begin to shut down, right? Because what's true is that there's a grace in the unraveling. Like you kind of getting to the end of yourself, cleaning up the bathroom. Or for me, I always joke, I cleaned, let's just say beyond the areas of like diapering. I have a lot of experience with cleaning all the things in the bathroom department. And it doesn't really matter the age. It just might be an accident. It might be a thing. And you just get real comfortable with poop.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just
every day. That's right.
It is what it is. And I'll never forget. I think I don't curse, but there was a moment there when I wanted to spell out the word scrubbing SHIT out of sheets. I was like spraying the shout and scrubbing it and spraying the shout and scrubbing it. And I was just in the laundry room this is my life. We are 15 years in and just still scrubbing the stuff out of the stuff.
That's right.
And there's nothing that will keep you more humble than that,
100%.
honestly. And I, just like you, was going, one morning I just was complaining, because you can get back into that victim
100%.
mode. You can repentance happens in a moment, thankfully.
Well, we're human. We're human.
Right.
We have real reactions to this.
And we should be honest.
Sure.
Right. But then we lament like the psalmist, but then we go, but God.
That's right.
Here's what you have said, and here's what you are doing in me. And so it was always going back to this idea of going, one day I just remember going, thank you for this. Thank you for him. Thank you for her. Thank you for the trial. Thank you. I wouldn't love you like I do without it. I wouldn't need you like I do without it. I wouldn't desire you like I do without it. I wouldn't long for more redemption. I wouldn't have compassion like I do without it. Like all of it has been for my good and your glory. There's like nothing wasted. And I know people say that. And then if you're new to this community, you're probably eye rolling. You're like, if somebody else says nothing is wasted, because you just can't know until you know. And it's literally just putting one foot in front of the other. And that is the resilience journey. It's just one small step at a time. This transformation that is undoing us, it's unraveling us. And all of a sudden we truly are becoming these hands and feet, not because we're holy, not because we're self-righteous, or not because we somehow have figured this thing out, but more because we don't have another option. There's a beauty in not only being poor in spirit, but caring for the poor in spirit, right? Caring for widows and orphans, caring for those who are on the outskirts of society, caring for those who can't always, or advocating, right? Advocating for those who can't advocate for themselves. There's an annual IEP meeting, and we go in there and we go, this is what he needs, or this is what she needs, in the same way the Spirit advocates on our behalf to the Father. This is what she needs and what she needs. There's a beauty in living this out, and I think it calls, like you said, it calls us forth. It's the fullness of what we were made for. And I think as Christ followers, as mamas, as advocates, that we are made to fight. Like we are to wield not my might or my power, but by the Spirit. We are supposed to actually create some transformation change. Right. Whether it's in the special needs community or whatever the injustices look like all around society. God gives us stories that gives us very personal, potent impacts in those spaces.
I think it's so easy to read scripture and, knit it on a pillow, and I can do all things through the Christ who strengthens me, but you don't really want to be in situations where only Christ can strengthen you to get through it. And I think this unraveling you're talking about, even the scriptures that are coming to mind of dying to self and life by the Spirit versus life by the flesh and the desires of the flesh. And this idea of dying to yourself sounds so nice. Yes, Paul, amen. Yes and amen. We preach, sermon, all the things. And then we don't want to actually do it. We don't want to actually be in situations that feels like it is literally just pulling us apart. And, we've used examples of trial or the day-to-day grind or a story we've been chosen. It can also happen in situations where, you and I even shared this in our friendship sometimes, of God putting you in a situation and asking you to do something where you absolutely do not want to obey. And for me, that was leaving Ramsey. Like there was nothing bad or hard. It was the peak of my career, the best year of my life there. I mean, I had all my best friends. I loved the work. I loved everything. And in the middle of that environment, God's like, hey, I want you to leave. I'm like, no, not that. It wasn't just the fear of the income. It wasn't just the security. Sure. It was like, I don't want that. And so he will sometimes put us in situations where it causes us to very literally die to our will.
Yeah.
I want to stay and you're saying go, or I want to fill in the blank. I've heard countless stories, Rebekah, where people have written into me or sent me messages on Instagram of God called me to do this. And it was like the thing they would never, ever, ever want to do.
Yeah.
I was just hearing a story last night of a woman. She said, I was so comfortable here in Franklin and God called us to move to LA. And I was like, no, Lord. No. No.
You're like, everyone's supposed to be going from there to here, but from here to there is a little different. Yeah.
He's sending you on over. But it causes us, it puts us in a situation where we have the opportunity to truly die to ourselves. But something happens there in the dying to self, in an unraveling you're describing. Yeah. Something happens there that is so beautiful and produces such fruit. And it's the fruit of the Spirit. It's these things that we could never conjure up on our own with just an inspirational post, or just like even good, happy, normal times can't produce that level of fruit. I think of even my level of confidence in the Lord is completely different today than it was 2 years ago because of what he's brought me through. I'm like, I know God can handle it. And so talk a little bit about this, how this has played out in your life when God has called you to do something that is, you're like, no, not that. Because I mean, I remember even you telling me there was something, I mean, it was a million years ago. I think this was when your kids were really little. I hope it's okay that I share this. We can cut it out.
I know. I'm like, what did I say?
Well, you and Gabe felt called to do something, and you were like, you were really nervous about it.
Yeah.
And he was like, what are you scared of? You're like, I'm scared we're going to be in a van by the river.
Oh, yeah, for sure. 100%.
I was like, I feel that.
I know.
But where God calls you to do something, it's just so scary. But again, it forges a resilience, but the fork in the road, we have a choice. We can obey or not.
Yeah.
We can die to ourselves and trust God, or we can insist on doing it our way, like Jonah, and just, no, I'm going, no, thank you.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about when you've had those moments and how you've chosen to die to yourself and chosen to trust the Lord, and how you've, been resilient through that.
For sure. Well, the invitation of God, I'm going to call it an invitation.
Sure. I like that. That's way nicer.
Not a lecture,
Yeah.
Not a hand slap, but an invitation always requires sacrifice and surrender. And so usually God is inviting you into something more and abundant, but it begins with sacrifice and surrender. And all we see is the sacrifice and surrender, but obedience does bear fruit, like we talked about, right? Obedience, when we know it's God, and here's how you know it's God. It wasn't your idea. It makes no logical sense.
Yeah.
People are probably trying to discourage you at some point because of that reason, but it's something you can't shake. It's like sand in your shoe, and you just can't get it out, and it keeps coming back, and it's irritating because you know you can't do it, and then you start seeing the waterworks, and you're going, but I can't not do it.
Yes. Oh, that's so good.
Oh, those are the worst, right?
Yes.
I can't do it, but I can't not do it. And man, I made that decision moving to New York, in 2010. We made that same exact decision. It's almost this example of putting all the chips back in the middle of the table. We're like, everything's up for grabs. Like whatever life we've built based on the last decision is now like, it's like a Jenga tower.
Right.
It's just shattered. And you're putting it all back in the center, and you're going, okay, God, not my life, but yours, right? Not my will, but yours. Lose my life again to find it again. And so same thing happened with Joy. We got the invitation to adopt a child with Down syndrome. When the first time I was terrified for God to choose for me to have Down syndrome. But this time he was inviting me to choose. And I was like, wait, I feel like we're good, right? But yet I couldn't shake it. I could not shake adoption. And then finally the Lord made it very clear. And I was like, I was wrestling with the decision. It came very suddenly. We were having our 20th anniversary. Are we going to bring a little girl home from China who's 5, who's never known family? She was placed at an orphanage at 4 months. And that's scary in itself, like zero attachment to any form of a, parental figure. And I remember discipling a girl across the table at one of the little coffee shops in Franklin, and she was making a college decision. And I'm like, I just said, at some point, God just looks at you and says, do you trust me? And the minute the words came out of my mouth, I started bawling. And I was like, I'm not even talking to her right now.
I'm talking to me.
Yeah, like
he's making me talk to me.
This was for her. And all of a sudden it hit me.
That's right.
And how often does that happen? You're trying to minister and deflect. And like, it's about you. But like all of a sudden I wept. And that was the Lord. He's like, do you trust me? I was like, do I quit work? And like, do you trust me? No answer, just do you trust me? And I'm like, whew, I thought I did. But apparently in this decision, it's been really challenging. But yet here we are almost 7 years later. And we said yes. And there is always a surrender that goes with yes. Like, I wrote this devotional, a surrendered yes, because it truly is like, I can't not, but I have no idea how this is going to go. But that's when this holy resilience kicks in, right? It's 2 Corinthians 4:8. We're pressed and we're crushed, but we're not destroyed. Yes. We're perplexed, but we're not given to despair. Why? Because we carry Christ's light shining in us, right. And that is why we never give up. We're these fragile clay jars, and we're cracked, but His light is going to go through us, and and it says, therefore, we never give up. And that is the resilience I think we're talking about. In society, resilience is defined by bouncing back, right? That 1600, definition in the dictionary was like to recoil or rebound. But the later definition added one that's more layered and nuanced, and I think what we're experiencing is to resume a new position after a season of compression and bending low. And if you have adversity in your life without an end date, you always live compressed a little. There is a bending, there is a lowering, there's a humbling service of, whatever you're cleaning up in the laundry room, right? And that prolonged resilience, that adversity prolonged, is growing in resilience because now that I study neuroscience and I go, okay, this is what God says about resilience. So what is the psychiatry and the brain? Well, how's the brain process resilience? Well, now I understand that in neuroscience, that the brain can only grow in resilience through novelty. Like it needs novelty to heal and to be revitalized, right? Like to regenerate those neural pathways, meaning you have to do a new thing. That's a little scary and a little unknown. And what that does is it activates your stress response, which is a good thing if it's moderate and predictable and controllable. And if you have people around you that are going to support you in it. And so that's why every child that goes to a new setting, a new school, has a new teacher, a new grade, new classmates, new subjects, new sports, new music, new performances, new competitions, that's actually training of a child in resilience. It's when we shield them from activating that stress response to feeling a little bit of nerves before a test or competing, on a field or singing a solo or whatever that looks like. If we reduce our kids from experiencing those things, they will not be confident and they will not be resilient. Their lives will actually get very small. And so the same goes for us as adults. I think we get through those confidence days in school, and whether those were good or bad, everyone's story is different. One year was great, one year was terrible. Maybe college was great, maybe high school was terrible, vice versa. But wherever you were pushed just enough with the people who encouraged you as you went and didn't affirm the outcome, but it affirmed the work ethic, that actually increases your resilience. And the reason why I think we're struggling so much now as a society is we're very comfortable with comfort. We're like, we pushed through, we did the thing, we climbed the mountain, we got the promotion, we got married, we had the kids. Now we just want to sit. And rest is sacred too, but we weren't made to sit and rest. Right? We have a rhythmic rest of Sabbath once a week. That is a part of sitting and surrendering and acknowledging your limits. But it's so that you can be fueled from that rest to go back out. And I think we have lost sight of how strong God has made us because it's His power at work in us, not ours. And we've got to push ourselves to do hard things, not for achievement and reputation, but because His glory is on display when we obey.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting too, because I was seeing something, this was a few months ago, I guess it was, and it was an interview that I saw a clip on Instagram, and they were talking about how, people talk about the midlife crisis, and in midlife, a lot of the kind of crisis that comes from it is just boredom of not any change.
Yeah.
So you go through all this change from childhood, teens, young adulthood, you're getting married, you're moving, new jobs, there's change. You get into
challenge all along the way.
Challenge, right. You get into midlife, 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, and there's just not a lot of change. And so people kind of get bored and they get lethargic. They start to lose their confidence and so on. And it's interesting. I have started, this is such a random example, but I started taking tennis lessons. And there was a tennis cardio class, and I was really intimidated to go to it. This is such a silly example, but I think it still highlights as adults.
Is it.
I was so nervous to go, Rebekah. I was so nervous to go because I knew these people are really good tennis players. And it was super fast paced. And so if you don't know what's going on, you could just kind of get run over or whatever. And so on, I think it was Saturday of last weekend, I was going and I told my kids before I went, I said, hey, I want y'all to know that I'm going to this tennis class and I'm really nervous. And I said, but I can do it. I said, I'm going to go anyway, because that's how we get confident, is by facing hard things.
Yeah.
Even when we're scared, we do it scared. We show up and I go, I just want you to know before we go, I'm really nervous and I'm going to go anyway. And I wanted to model that even as a 41-year-old woman, that I'm going to something that intimidates me, because when they go out for the soccer team or I want them to know they're not alone, that this is something that we can do. You can do hard things. And I came back, and of course I was so much more confident. I had so much fun. It developed those muscles.
Yeah.
And, you and I were just talking recently, I'm on a big kick right now about the anxious generation, just how it's transformed my parenting and just giving them more freedoms and more independence. But one of the quotes in there that stuck out to me was, and I can't remember, the author is actually quoting someone else, but he said, we should make our kids uncomfortable every day. And that stood out to me because it's so opposite of how we actually parent.
Yeah.
We try to insulate them, but then we expect they'll be resilient. And it's through discomfort and learning to cope and learning to be strong and show up and be brave and be courageous and face the kickball team or whatever the thing is that they develop these skills, and you can't manufacture them any other way except through these trials and difficulties and hard things. And I think it's so interesting because it's such a wake-up call for us parents to be intentional with letting our kids be uncomfortable.
Yeah. Bravery is moving scared, right? It doesn't mean that you don't have, the threat of fear, right? But you still are walking into it, right? Because I always talk to people, like even my kids, I'm like, the knowing is in the doing. Like you can think something's like, oh, that's interesting. But if we're not going to be lifelong learners and try things, you talk about tennis. Like for me, the last few years, I just decided if I'm not a lifelong learner, I'm dying. My brain is atrophying because it's not taking on new novel things and trying to overcome those things, whether it's grad school, seminary, and mine are 2 G's, golf and gardening.
I love it.
In the last 5 years, I have become quite an amateur novice, somewhere in the middle of golf and gardening. And I was just laughing with Gabe the other day. I was like, both of these things have challenged me and created a lot of fun and joy. And I didn't want to really do either initially, but Gabe was going to golf. So I can either, if you can't beat them, join them, and I was like, we have 2 special needs kids. We're empty nesting in the way we know what it looks like now. The 4 of us are hanging out indefinitely. And so our oldest has Down syndrome and our youngest has Down syndrome because we adopted her. And he's 23 and she's 11. So after school, on certain nights, we'll do twilight golf for about 9 holes. And she'll jump on my cart. Kate will jump on his. They'll have snacks. They putt every couple holes. But Gabe and I are having a great time too. Like it's just a family thing. And then we started gardening in 2020. So this is now our 5th year, our 5th summer gardening. And I've learned so much about like eating food that I've grown from the ground. Not me. I planted. God grew. Let's be honest. I'm just cultivating. I'm just tending. I'm just tending. I'm pruning. Lifting things up to the sun, making sure there's, water and air, like getting them exposed to what God's going to bring. But that part has been very joyful. And whether it's like food and then now creating new recipes because I'm staring at a bunch of zucchini that needs to be somehow inhaled, or sourdough or chickens or whatever. Well, we used to live in Manhattan, like a decade ago, we were in a high rise, but yet I love that season as much as this season. That had its own challenges. And I think as long as we're stepping into things that we're like, I would never do this, but here we are. And maybe I was even reluctant at first. I now see the fruit of it, literally. Right. But right. I see that my life, is varied, right? We have a lot of interests, and we have a lot of buckets that I think the Lord wants to bring abundance in, and we don't have to silo or narrow our lives so much, because if you avoid fear, it grows, and we tell our kids that. But I think as parents, we run the risk of doing the same. And what you were just saying about midlife, Viktor Frankl talks about this in That Man's Search for Meaning. Towards the end, he talks about how this existential crisis that really is like, who am I? Why am I here? Does my life matter? Does my life have meaning? Are all those questions of that midlife season. And he says that crisis roots out of a society of affluence and boredom. So basically, when the brain is idle and is no longer governed by what it must do, like hunt for food, or care for your elderly, or it's now governed by what you want to do. And if you don't have much responsibility, we're never really meant to govern ourselves by what we want to do, because everything we've ever been given is to care for something beyond ourselves. And then that's when the brain goes crazy.
Wow.
Because it was never meant. He said, like, even in the garden, he's like, take dominion, cultivate the earth, like partner with me in the renewal of things.
Yes.
Don't just sit back and eat berries, right? No, you're going to get dirty. Get your
right.
hands dirty.
Right.
You're going to toil. You're going to have the sweat of your brow. You're going to have pains in childbirth. But why? Because you're keeping civilization going.
That's right. That's right. There's a purpose to it.
Yeah.
For someone that is listening right now and they want to be a resilient person, but maybe don't naturally feel that way, or they're not sure how to even cultivate this, are there any either truths or statements or verses that you very much lean on when you're going through something? Like, I'll tell you one for me as an example. For the most basic, simple, childlike promise and truth is, God, you are good. So no matter what I'm facing, even though I feel like I'm dying to myself, or I can't face it, or this is too hard, or why do you have me here? All the things that we really feel, because we're human and we have real feelings and things are really hard. I will say to myself, I will declare it out loud, Rebekah, in my car through tears. I'll say, I know you are good. This doesn't feel good, but I know you are good. I know you are good. It's kind of this anchor statement for me that helps me call up my resilience, because if you are good, then I can get through this. If you are good, then you can, there's all these dominoes that fall if you are good. Are there anything, any verses or statements or truths that our listeners could kind of cling to like that when they're facing something? They're like, I want to be resilient. Give me an anchor, to carry me through.
Yeah.
That.
So what I say every day, middle of the night, if I'm awake, if I feel anxious, like tight chest, I just stop and I just say, Jesus, I abide in you. Like right now, like I'm going to fix my gaze on you and take it away from whatever is stressing or scaring, or even maybe the circumstances that feel looming. Maybe I feel wronged. That's irrelevant, because right now I'm going to fix my eyes back on you. And he says, I will keep her in perfect peace whose mind is fixed on me because she trusts in me. And when I go, Jesus, I abide in you, it's not that I'm coming to you and I'm getting the dose of peace that I need and then I'm running back out. He's like, no, if you remain in me and my words remain in you, then your joy will be full and you will lack nothing, right? So I kind of go, maybe I'm actually spinning out because I've looked away and that I've taken my mind off you. And instead, all the big things in the world feel so big and scary and looming, or, whatever is in front of me in the laundry room. But no, I'm going to recenter and go, Jesus, I abide in you. And as a result of that, I don't even keep talking about me. It really is irrelevant, because what I do once I abide in you, I go, you are my Lord and my King and my Savior, and I worship you. And now all of a sudden I'm just giving him adoration. And yes, there might be a moment like, will you resolve the angst in me? But I begin with worship. I give you my petitions, and then I end with thanksgiving. And it just recenters it in a moment. Like, it doesn't even matter the circumstance. Jesus, I abide in you, especially with a racing brain. I think if we keep all those intrusive thoughts on a loop, the only way we interrupt them is speaking what is true to the Lord and recentering our gaze back to him in that abiding life, because you can't stay in God's presence and believe a lie at the same time.
Yeah. That's so good. It makes me think even of Peter walking on water and just looking at him versus looking at the waves. It's like it's like that imagery is just so, and it's so simple and it's so hard to do.
Well, and
sometimes.
it's that verse, whatever you seek, you will find.
That's right.
Right? So if I seek back you, I'm finding you.
That's right.
I'm finding your peace, your love, your grace, your mercy, your kindness. But if I'm seeking over this, I'm going to find all the trouble that keeps coming, and I'm going to obsess about it.
Yeah.
So just redirect that gaze. And that's the second rule of resilience I write in the book. It's shift the narrative, right?
Yeah.
You can't shift the narrative if you don't shift your gaze.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. It's so simple, but it's also so practical. Rebekah, you are such a light. I'm just so thankful for your friendship. I experience just the Lord's goodness every time I hang out with you. And it comes, I don't know if it is, but it comes across so effortless for you. He flows through you, and your words are always words of encouragement that build other people up. And I'm just thankful for your friendship. Thanks for hanging out with us today. Thanks for teaching us. Tell people where they can connect with you and listen to your podcast and find out about your books and everything you've got.
Yes, absolutely. If you want to dig into the 5 rules of resilience, I write it in Building a Resilient Life.
Yes.
And you can find that on Amazon or anywhere books are sold. It's also on my website if you want it signed or personalized. So I'm just RebekahLyons.com, and then that same name, it's the Hebrew spelling. Thank you, Mom and Dad.
Yes.
Rebekah Lyons, and that's the handle for Instagram or Facebook or anything like that.
Yeah.
And then my podcast is Rhythms for Life, that was written out of the book Rhythms of Renewal a few years ago. That really is all about how to trade stress and anxiety for a life of peace and purpose. And that trading, again, is just Jesus, I abide in you. Reversing and shifting what we're looking at and paying attention to.
Yeah, something that we need to remember on repeat.
yeah. It's a drip.
That's
it's
right.
on drip. It's an
That's
IV drip every day. Recenter where I'm going.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. Thank you for being here. Thanks so much for encouraging us. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for joining me for this week's episode of Get Your Hopes Up. I love hanging out with you every Monday to help you get to know God, get closer to Him, and get your hopes up again. Be sure to share this episode wherever you tune in on Instagram, Facebook, so other people can get their hopes up as well. And then I'll see you next Monday for another new episode of Get Your Hopes Up.